cut off, top it like this, right? Like this. Had a nice, vigorous, growing shoot going up there. Cut it off. What did it do? Well, it sent out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 new points of growth in response. Well, sometimes it works like that. And sometimes it says, heck with you. If I can't grow here, I'll just waste this part and grow over here. This could have died off and this taken off instead. The plant isn't trying to create a beautiful image. It's just trying to live. And whatever way facilitates that is the way it's most likely to go, if it can. So, when I dug that tree and cut those big roots, it died back. And for a while I thought I lost it, but then it came back because life is resilient. It sent out all kinds of new stuff. I let it keep everything that it produced that year, right? No more taken away, right? Because I felt bad. I was guilty. I'm not going to cut you ever again. I let it grow for a year. And then this year, that was last year, and then this year I started shaping it. Next year, it'll be ready to go into a bonsai pot. And I have to do carving on it because now it has dead wood, right? It has big sections of dead wood. Well, dead wood on a deciduous tree. Can't tell you how many years I steered clear of that because the books that we were reading said, don't do that. You don't have dead wood on a deciduous tree. You can have it on a juniper, you can have it on a pine. You don't have it on a maple. You don't have it on an elm. For goodness sake, that's in bad taste or something. I don't know what it was. But yet, when I go out and reference nature, what do I see? All the time. Just like the coniferous trees, the deciduous trees suffer dieback. They have dead parts. They don't last as long, but they're part of the tree's ability to recover and keep going. Parts die, other parts still live, keep going. So we can do that. With deciduous trees. These branches, I'll invite you to come by and look at it more closely later. You look at the way they're shaped, they do all kinds of things that as beginners you should never do. Don't do this. Don't do it like this. Whatever you do. Because people will say bad things about you when you're not around. And they'll think that you don't get it. No, bonsai is not about making trees look like trees. Right? It's about making the beautiful image, the perfect tree. In the course of my learning, I came across this older gentleman who had been in bonsai for a long time, and he said to me one time, he said, bonsai is about the perfection of nature. And even then, when I didn't have clearly formed ideas of my own, I thought, that's wrong. That's wrong. The perfection of nature, perfect in what sense? Perfection implies, one, that there is such a thing as perfect, and two, it's a judgment call, right? What's perfect for you might not be perfect for you. Obviously, right? That's just part of life. That's why life is full of conflict. If we all thought the same thing was perfect, then we'd all get along perfectly. But we don't. We each have a different idea of what perfection might ought to be. And the idea of perfecting nature, it's like, oh, wait a minute. Nature is this force, right? This elemental force. You don't perfect it. What's that mean? Make it more like us? Make it more to our liking? Oh, the perfect landscape, a golf course. Gently rolling, neatly clipped lawns, tidy shrubs, a few big trees, but out of the way so they don't hurt anything. This carefully managed, micromanaged, everything finessed and refined kind of take on nature. It's fine if that's your cup of tea. If that appeals to you, then good. You can do it the way the books say and you'll get that kind of effect. But if you're more into the experience of being out there and seeing how they really grow, then you understand the only perfection there is comes in the totality. All the parts are imperfect. It's only when they're all together that they're perfect, right? So when we shape a tree, there's all kinds of imperfections. This branch coming down and then angling back up, the movement, the fact that multiple things come up to form the crown, not just one thing, multiple things. There's a show coming up that's put together by a member of your club, Steve Zeisel. It's a great show, great bonsai show, the Winter Silhouette Show. I'm sure you've heard about it, coming up in Kannapolis next month. Great opportunity, especially for those of you who are new and have not seen a bonsai show perhaps. Go to that show and see all these very, very nice trees that some skillful people have grown for a long time, and see them without their leaves, right? You see their structure, see how they're built, and then compare in your mind's eye those trees with how trees outside the building look. You'll find lots of variants. Some not so much. Some extremely so. Some people like their nature really, really neat and tidy. If it's a look that pleases you, then that's the right look. Other people want their trees to look rugged. Dan Robinson out in the Pacific Northwest, he wants his trees to look like they're dying. Seriously, that's not like they're dead, but like they're struggling to hold on to life. He loves that look. He looks for it in nature, and then he shapes his trees that way. And you can imagine what kind of response this gets from people who like their trees to be very neat and tidy. They look at his trees and they say, he doesn't know what he's doing. But he does know what he's doing. He's just wanting something different out of it. For me, what I want are trees that look like trees, because I find the general public responds very favorably to them. They don't have to imagine they're part of some other culture. It's their own culture. It's what's familiar. Now, even within those parameters, there's still lots of room for art, right? These are not in this arrangement by accident. They didn't just happen that way. All these branches that you see, they could have come out entirely differently, right? They could have been arranged differently. They could have been shaped differently. There were endless possibilities along the way as this thing was being built. But always, to me, the guiding light was to, make it look like a tree, but also make it something that people would feel comfortable looking at. And make it so that it would look good either way you looked at it. Right? The whole idea of having a front, which is, again, I don't know, maybe it's changed, but when I was learning bonsai, boy, first thing you did when you were designing a tree, where's the front? There, I guess. No, that's not the front. This is the front. That kind of approach to it, it works, it's fine, it's the standard. But there are other ways to go about it. Okay, so, put that one aside. I want to move this forward. And this is the tree I came to work on, but there's not a whole lot of work to be done on it. So that's why I talked to you for that moment. Just trying to fill up space. Okay. Thank you. Right, so this was in the ground until when? 2 years ago. All right, so it started as a one-year seed, about this big, right? Collected.
2 years ago?
It was in the ground for like 6-7 years.
Oh.
It's been out of the ground for 2 years. All right, so it came out of the ground, goes into this big oversized container, right? And first year, pretty much let it grow. And then the next year, do some cutting on it and let it grow. And that's what you're looking at. So this, from collection point, has been pruned twice. Both times at the start of the growing year. And then it's allowed to grow and keep everything. Why do that? Why do that? It's to, one, build strength, vitality. Right? If you're going to work a plant as bonsai, it has to be completely vigorous and healthy. Right? You're going to control the vigor, but it has to be there. It can't be an anemic plant, which is an unfortunate mistake that a lot of people make. They take a plant that's not in great shape. That's actually why they're attracted to it as bonsai. It's like, look at this plant. It's looking like it's hardly even alive. That would make a great bonsai. No, that would make a terrible bonsai. Maybe if you recover its health, then you can work it as a bonsai. But if you take a struggling plant and start taking stuff away from it and putting wire around it and such, you're almost certainly expediting its demise. It needs to be healthy. And the best way to promote health in a plant is to let it grow. This is common knowledge among bonsai people who've been in the game for a while. You have a plant that's struggling as a bonsai, take it out of that little pot, put it in the ground, or put it in a bigger pot, and just let it grow. That's the surest way to bring it back to some better level of health. right? And then you can torture it again and make it weak. So I let this grow to build health, but also to create options, right? I had this, was growing up tall and straight, and in being allowed to do that, it fed all this part, right? It helped build all this. The need for communication between the roots and the crown, facilitated by the structure the plant builds to make the connection between what's above the ground and below the ground. In a certain way of thinking, everything we know in life is a system. Plants are absolutely a system. And this part has a function, and this part you can't see has a function, and this part in between has a function, and they all operate in fairly predictable ways. So, in cutting this off, after allowing it to help build this up, I stimulate a response in the tree. I've checked it from growing the way that it wants to grow. What does it do? It activates latent buds, things that are just hanging out there, not doing anything much, but they're there as an insurance policy for just this sort of thing. Not that, a rapidly aging guy with a saw comes along and cuts it off, but in case, a big tree falls on it, in case a beaver chews it, in case, it's attacked by insects and that part of the tree dies. There are any number of ways calamity comes, and the tree has these built-in responses. The system comes with a backup, right? This is the backup, triggered into action by this calamity. Checked from doing what it wanted to do, it responds with new growth in new places. From our standpoint, what that amounts to are options. These are options. The more branches I have, the more options I have. The more latitude I have to create different looks. Well, create different looks. Why would you want to do that? You're making a bonsai, right? Just triangular shaped crown. I mean, what's the different look? The different look is the individuality of each plant. Just like in nature, just like in each of us. Look at all of us, right? What do we have? We have 2 eyes, we have 2 ears, we have 2 arms, we have 2 feet, right? We got all the same stuff, essentially, right? Some people's is in better shape than other people's, but we all have the same stuff. Yet we're all somehow completely different, right? We all have individuality. The trees do too. There's a tree, there's another tree, there's another tree, there's another tree. Yes, but each one is an individual. Each one grew in a certain way out of 2 main factors. One, genetics, right? What is the plant capable of as a member of its species? Maples grow differently than pines, for example. And then environmental factors. What happened to this tree along the way? Where was it growing? Okay, this tree had the misfortune of becoming a bonsai subject. And so, cut, 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 right? And every time, what happens? Regrow. Stop it from doing what it wants, it tries again. Stop it from doing what it wants, it tries again. And each time you make those cuts, you should, ideally, be making choices, decisions. Not eeny, meeny, miny, mo decisions, but decisions aimed towards a goal. What's your goal? Well, if you're in the phase of bonsai where you're studying the books like I did, then your goal is to make a tree that looks like the one in the books. Or the one in the magazine. Whatever your prime source of inspiration is. If you're into trees in nature, then your objective is to make a tree that looks plausible. Not ordinary, right? We don't want a tree that makes people yawn. We want a tree that engages them, that makes them look twice, makes them look at from different angles. How do you do that? By building interest into every little part of it. How do you do that? By the choices you make when you prune. Okay, so look at something like this. How do you know where to begin? This is one of the common questions. I talk to people who don't know bonsai all the time. You know, they're my customers. They come through and they look at the trees, and I wish they would ask me all kinds of, you know, subtle questions about art, imitating nature and such, but they don't. They say, how do you know what to cut off? Well, it's actually a pretty good question. How do you know what to cut off? Well, for me now, that question is answered by the frame of reference I carry in my head. How do trees grow? Here's an example. I have a branch that came out. I stopped it. It responded with 2 new points of growth. Do I want to keep them both? Do I want to take one off and keep the other? Do I want to remove them both and hope for something better on the next try? In my mind, I don't think I'll get better than that out of that branch. That's what it's capable of doing. I'm going to go with it, and I'm going to remove this one. Why that one? Well, because it makes more sense to me that the tree would do that, right? If something happened to check it in its growth, it would respond more by going up. Well, wait a minute. This one responded by going both ways. This is a young tree, right? That's not my objective, to make a young tree. I want this to look like an old tree. How old is this tree? This tree is about 20 years old. It's not old for a tree. That's hardly even getting started for a tree. They're capable of living hundreds, sometimes even thousands of years. They want to grow up, so that's what I'm going to do with that one. But I don't want all that. I'm going to cut it there. What is my expected response on the tree's part? These 2 buds right here, which were kind of hanging down there, probably would have produced leaves anyway, but now they're almost certainly going to, because what had been the terminal bud has been removed, and several others behind it removed. That makes this one next in line. That means all the energy that flows out this way is going to be primarily expressed through these 2 buds. Is this 100% guarantee? No, it's not. Not any more than anything else in life is 100% guarantee. But that's a reasonably good bet. So when I start out and I'm looking at things and thinking what to cut, I always want to approach it kind of slowly and cut things that I think are really not legitimate options to begin with. Why do it that way? Because there's some kind of momentum or rhythm that you build up by doing that I build up. That's what I find anyway. I'm making cuts that I feel very confident about. Like, I'm not going to need that, so I'm going to take it off. And in the action of just moving around the tree, identifying things that I think are less useful and removing them, you start to get comfortable with what you're doing. You start to think of it, or I shouldn't say that. You don't think. You stop thinking. I think it's better like that, if you can. Well, that's bad advice, isn't it? Stop thinking. Did you ever get in trouble without thinking first? I never have. Every time I've gotten in trouble, it's because I thought something, but I thought the wrong thing. So if you don't think your chances of being wrong go down. Just respond. Right? So I'm looking at this, and here's a choice. It might seem like an obvious choice. Well, look how much fatter this branch is than this. Why not keep both of them? They'll compete. And this one's decidedly disadvantaged because it's growing under this one. This one's stronger. It's receiving more of the energy from the tree. It's going to produce leaves above this one. And this one's fate is not so great right now. You know, it's looking like it's in an inferior position. But here's something that I've come to appreciate over time, is that you create interest through diversity of shape, too, and caliper, right? So there is a difference between the caliper of this part and this part, but there's a more dramatic difference if I take this off, right? There's more dramatic effect from that ratio of difference. Now that will mitigate over time. This is going to grow more strongly. It's going to fatten up too, but this has such a serious head start that this will always be noticeably less than this. If these are the same kind of visual weight, the same visual value, then you create a spot where the viewer potentially isn't sure what to look at, right? Where does my eye go in this composition? Now there's no doubt. Your eye travels the stronger line. This becomes a a secondary, almost like an accent to the main line. Okay. Yes. So this is a funky little move here, but it was done very intentionally, right? That was a cut made, and I chose the downward response. And then another cut was made, and I chose the upward response. And the whole idea is to build movement in this thing. I'm going to hold on to this till later, and I'll tell you why later. I'm not going to make that choice just yet. I'm going to move to another part of the tree. This is also something that I've come to do more frequently now and think of as a good strategy. Don't work in one spot exclusively. Don't stand here and do this until it's entirely done, and then move over here and do this until it's entirely done. Work here, turn, look at it from all angles, do a little work here, do a little work here. Work on the thing in a holistic kind of way, right? Because what you're trying to create is this whole image of a tree. It's three-dimensional. That's where that idea of having a front is very strange. Since when do three-dimensional things have fronts? When I look at a tree out there, does it have a front? No, but it may very well have a view that I think is better than the other views. And so if I were growing that same tree in a pot and I was going to show it in a show, then I would stick that most favorable view forward. So yes, if you want to say that's a front, that's a front. But in building the tree, I don't want to be thinking about fronts. I want to think about a whole tree. How to make it look good from every angle. And then
do you normally work with the lazy Susan?
Yeah, it's very, very helpful. Yes. You'll find that too. Even with a little tree, then you need a little turntable. But being able to rotate it around and get a different look at the ease of moving your hand is very good. Very useful. Here's another one. Some of these things, you cut them and they regrow, but they regrow too much in the sense that they provide more than what we actually need or want. And if you allow all of this to grow, then this part here will swell up and get rather ugly. So it's important to come back and clean up these areas by reducing the number of branches they've produced. And here again, you come across something that's regarded as a rule or a guideline, however you prefer to say it, and that is typically at any juncture you're only going to have two divergent points. Right? That's not hard and fast. You can have more than that, but typically you're going to try to reduce it to just two. This one had 5, I think. Now it's down to 2. Maybe this stays, maybe it doesn't. I'm not sure yet. It stays for now. That's another thing I've learned. If I don't feel very certain about it, there's no big hurry to run out and do it. Right? If I don't have a clear idea today of how it should be, then I'll look at it again tomorrow, or maybe the next day, or the day after that, or next year. Some decisions take years to make. Well, if it's a big decision, why not take years? Why not work, let the process work through and get to a point where you feel pretty confident that what you're doing is the best thing. Well, one reason you might not do that is because you're doing a demonstration. People have a certain level of expectation, let's see you make this look like a tree.
Arthur, why are you pruning now?
Why not?
In the spring.
Can't prune everything. Who asked that question?
Me.
Out. Get out. Because, one, a very practical thing is we have too many plants for me to do everything at the optimal time. I have to do some things at the less than optimal time so that I don't get run over when the optimal time comes. All right? But on the other hand, why not prune right now? What would be the danger in pruning now?
Well, it could kill things with the frost. They're now hardened off enough.
Well, this tree is dormant. It still has some leaves on it.
Well, that's a good reason.
But it's
dormant.
Well, what's wrong with pruning something that's dormant?
Healing?
It will cover in due time. If I cut it now, as opposed to cutting it in the spring, it's still going to heal at the same time. Not heal. That's a bad word to use because it's not actually healing. It's covering over. But it'll do that when it's ready to do it anyway. So you could argue that, well, less time with that big open wound, but it takes years for it to cover something like that. So that's going to be open all that while. That's why I brought this. Right? Any big wounds that I'm concerned about, I go ahead and coat them with that. And then they're sealed off for the time being.
Okay.
And the entryway is sealed off. I'm not trying to rough you up or anything. That's, in truth, there are probably lots of people in this room who were thinking the same thing. Or would be if they...
I don't have as many trees as you, so I try to go at the optimal time.
Yes, that makes good sense.
Arthur,
Jim?
you're also leaving stubs, so if there is
Yeah.
dieback, it's not going to get into the vital part that he's using later. Is that not correct?
Yeah, that's correct. No, that's
So if
absolutely
you were
correct.
cut close to the branch, that would be damaging.
Have you ever pruned a maple in spring? What usually happens? Like massive sap loss. Well, I'm talking about the immediate response to your cutting. For several days afterwards, the thing runs sap. People say it's bleeding. The tree's bleeding. No, it's not bleeding.
Trying to make people sugar candy.
That's right. If that was actually harmful to trees, then the sugar maples of New England would have been wiped out a century ago. It's something they're capable of doing, and eventually they close that off and they stop running the sap. But the little bit that they lose is not a big deal, but it doesn't look good, for one thing. So pruning at this time of year, you don't get any of that because the tree is in essence dormant. It's like processes are on hold for the time being, largely, not entirely. Many times, these maples, especially these that I have in development, I repot them at this time of year too. And then they go through the winter and they freeze and thaw multiple times. And just like you, I was taught that would kill them. It was bad to do it. It might not be the best thing, but it is not a death sentence by any means. At least not with the plants that I've worked with.
Do you cut a lot of the roots, repotting, or?
Yeah, just a normal amount. Yeah, don't hold back. But, I'm usually doing that only with these things that are in an earlier stage of development. A tree that, I've invested a lot in and it's been worked on for a long time, that's what I'm going to try to hold and do at the better time. So it's always like that, There's the way that you would optimally do things if you were living in the perfect world, and then there's the way that you often have to come up with to take advantage of what is actually in front of you.
Arthur,
Yes, please.
regarding your large stobs that are near the apex,
Yes, here.
at what time in its development will you be taking those out?
I'm thankful for you asking the question, and the answer is I don't know. I'm waiting to see what happens. I expect a certain amount of dieback, and with some of them you can clearly see where the dieback has occurred. Right here, cut was made here. Here's the lifeline right here, or the death line, depending on how you want to look at it. From this point on out, it's dead. From this point on back, it's still alive. If I wanted to, I could take the saw now and make a cut there, right at that line, knowing that everything I was removing was actually dead, and then the remaining living part could begin rolling that callus in. And then 10 years from now, 15 years from now, I would have something like this. Right? The wound would still be there, and I'd have a donut around it. Well, here's another one up here. In horticultural terms, strictly from horticultural terms, that's fine, because allowed to continue doing what it's doing. Eventually it'll do that, and then that, and then, it becomes nothing more than a little bump or blemish on the bark of the tree. It takes a long time. It takes even longer when you're starting to work the top part of the plant and limit its energy and its growth, right? You're cutting down on its vigor, and that's going to slow down everything. It's going to slow down the rate of growth even when it comes to covering wounds. And so these big wounds, as I'm starting to work this plant and take more and more away from it, my expectation is those big wounds are going to take longer to cover than I have to live. That's the truth. It's going to take decades for that to really cover over. And in the meantime, it may die back anyway. You know, there's nothing says that the dieback will actually hold fast there. It could continue on down into the core of the plant. It happens. So my feeling now about stuff like that is I'm going to cut it and I'm going to wait and see what it does. If this starts to rot, right, gets pulpy, then I'm going to take a pair of pliers and pull off all the parts that will come off without me cutting. Just break it away, tear it away. And my feeling is, in most cases, the best look you're going to get is letting the plant take care of that itself, right? Smaller wounds are more likely, you know, to cut them flush, treat them with the glue to seal them off, and let the plant cover them over, which it'll do, you know, fairly quickly. But these bigger wounds now, whenever I make them, I leave a stub and let it die back. Let the plant show me how I should treat that. And somewhere along the line, I'll want to, you know, make it more interesting if I can. A little carving, maybe a little hollowing out, what have you. But at this point, I'm content to let them be what they are, and then work with what the plant does next. In a certain way of thinking, that's how bonsai operates. You know, it's a dialogue between you and the subject plant. The plant grows, you do something to it, generally cut, remove something. The plant responds. Then you respond again. And it goes back and forth, just like a conversation. And if you're paying attention, you know, you can steer the conversation and get good effect out of it. But just like when you're conversing to a person, if you're going to be all pushy and insist on, you know, just having the conversation go your way, sometimes the plant will show its resentment, you know? And the thing that you were counting on to be the main branch dies back. Or the thing you were thinking was going to be the new leader dies back. And there you are, you know, hey, time to make up a new plant. So, now, you know, without wandering into that kind of new agey, touchy-feely stuff, I try to listen to what the plant's telling me. You know, I try to be sensitive to what the plant needs and what it's trying to do. And I want, if at all possible, to work with that. Not work against it, work with it. Because that increases my chances of success. The more I'm trying to force the plant to do what I want it to do, the greater risk I run of having the plant respond badly. That's my feeling. There are some people who make their name in bonsai by doing all this dramatic stuff, you know, like, oh, he's killed the plant. No, it's still alive. It's a miracle. You know, that's a certain tactic you can use. You can go that route if it's appealing to you. But, you know, at this stage of the game, mostly what I want is for the plant to live. I want to create something engaging and interesting to look at, and that will work much better if the plant is alive and healthy and not dead or struggling. So, primary concern, take care of the plant, watch it, pay attention to what it does.
You were going to tell us why you didn't cut that one off.
Yes. And then I just bulldozed
Didn't you
over
just
it.
walk?
Yes. Oh, that one. I thought it was this one.
No.
No? Well, fine. I'll show you on this one instead. It was this one.
Yes.
Yeah, this is the one I started with.
Yeah.
Oh, I see your game. There's one in every crowd. It sometimes takes a while to recognize who it is. Sooner or later. All right, so here, you know, I've got this kind of conglomeration going on back here. And some of it is just dead stubs. You know, they'll remedy themselves by and by. But there's a lot of, you know, actively growing points here. Too many. And I think this one is most expendable. I'm going to take it out. Oh, look at that. That helps. So down here, you know, this might be excess, or this might be excess. I don't think I need both of them. I like this one better. It's more interesting. I pick up the greater difference in caliper, right? And again, this will fatten up. It won't always be a little thing like this. but it creates more interest because of its downward movement, and it has its own kind of upswing, right? Done by the plant instead of by me cutting it and forcing it to regrow. So I think I'm going to keep that one and take off the better developed one. How am I thinking about this right now, design-wise? I'm thinking about having parts distributed all around so that each has its own access to the light, right? There's a little bit of competition goes on within any tree. Sometimes it's fatal competition, you know. The upper part with the dominant position wins out and the lower one dies out. That happens all the time. But in arranging a tree like this, consciously choosing where parts will be and where they won't, it's good to pay attention to the plant's need for sunlight and give everything access, right? You'll notice I'm letting this one remain long and this one remain long because I'm not certain what to do with this one. I know what I want to do with this one, but now that you've expressed interest in it, I'm going to wait till the very end to show it to you. Sorry. All right. I'm looking at...
She goes to the bathroom.
I'm not sure I like this being here. I like the idea of something kind of working this zone here because that would happen. You know, logically, if there's access here, something's going to grow up to fill it. But maybe after this grows in, that will be less of an issue, right? Because there'll be something here. We've got this, there'll be something here, there'll be something here. That makes me feel better about taking this out. Okay. So these things angle out. Why do they angle out? Because there's going to be a crown here, a canopy that's blocking the sun. They have to angle out in order to get access. Once they get to a point where they can have access, then parts start moving up. Okay. So this deal right here, I'm really not sure about it. I think I need something over on this side. And then that makes me wonder, like, well, then do I need this one? I don't know. I don't know right now. So I'm not going to make a choice. I'm going to leave them both. You know, simple enough to take something away. Wait and see.
Well, one of the things too, I guess, is because I don't look at the tree and say, okay, go away from the rules, but anything on the underside.
Yeah.
So you're doing that on purpose then?
Yes. Because this is something I learned from Dan Robinson. He pointed it out to me. Because I noted it on his trees. Branches that do things like this branch is doing. Only he really exaggerates it. Sometimes he'll have a branch come down and angle different ways and then come up over here. And I say, damn, that looks strange. And then he'd take me out and show me a tree in the forest, an old tree, you know, 700-year-old Doug fir. And what do you see? You see branches doing that. So then it becomes a matter of taste. Well, I don't do that because I don't like that look. That look looks bad to me. It makes the tree look unkempt. It makes it look like I don't have a good idea for the design. I'm just letting it do whatever it wants, which is exactly the criticism that Dan gets for a lot of his work, and Walter Paul too, because they're thinking and creating in a naturalistic vein, and then the audience is interpreting in a more traditional vein. And so a lot of the stuff doesn't look good because it's not what they're expecting to see. So what I want to do is pull this down like so. In nature, again, you have a branch that's growing, something happens. It gets truncated. And then some part that was secondary is in position to carry on and now be the main line. What happens to it? Well, something could damage it too, and then you get that succession. But also, it could survive for a certain amount of time where it extends really far out. Well, this is really far out, isn't it? Yes, but this is a young plant. And I'm trying to represent an old plant, which means it would never get to be this long. If we were looking at this proportionately as a big tree, hardly ever see limbs that exaggerated on a big tree. Why? Because stuff happens to them. Once they're hanging way out there, they're very prone to damage. Stuff happens. And what happens before that is all that weight out there expresses itself by bending the branch in an exaggerated way. So what started out going straight up ends up not only going out somewhat horizontally, but actually angling downward. So I want to do that, and the way that I'll do that is by taking a piece of wire and running it across diagonally between these two fence staples that are hammered into the top of the box. And that will give me something to pull off on. You know, something has to provide the counter force when you're leveraging a branch down, and that'll do it. You can take another piece of the same wire, aluminum wire. Aluminum's easier to work with. In some cases, you know, I would definitely prefer copper wire, but in some cases aluminum wire just works better. So why not use it? Unless you're one of those people that thinks only sissies use aluminum wire. Sissies and women. And we don't need either one. I'm sorry, I don't mean that. I'm saying that in a sarcastic way. Bonsai definitely needs more women. It would help if more women were interested in it. So I let this dry out quite a bit. It has a lot of flexibility. How much does it have? Well, we could find out, but I'd rather stop just short of finding out. We'll wrap it around here. Why not protect that? Well, because there's no way in the world I'm going to use all of this. So protecting it would serve no real practical purpose because it's going to get cut. Most likely it's going to get cut back here, maybe here. See, there's a little one here that could grow out and create a different kind of movement. That's another thing to be careful of. And I know from my own mistakes, a lot of branches that I shaped early on, when you looked at them from the front, they had lots of movement. They were doing all kinds of things. And then when you looked at them from the side, they were straight. Because I was looking at it one-dimensionally. And I only put the movement in one-dimensionally. And then, later I realized, well, you got to think in the round. And so instead of cutting to one that's going up or down, maybe you cut to one that goes to the side. And then you're building more interest in the movement of that branch. This is very picky stuff, right? But the end result is you get branches that look authentic. And you get parts where you need them, right? Without having to do a whole lot of crazy stuff. Just cut, grow, cut, grow, cut, grow. Where necessary, encourage the plant to grow a certain way. But especially early on, I find the less wire, the better, because often these trees get neglected next year, right? Because I have to work on these things and keep them looking good because these are more display worthy. These are works in progress. Sometimes they go months without me really paying much attention to them beyond giving them the water that they need. And then one day you look and that wire that you put on back in November is embedded in the branch, and then all the work that you put into that branch is ruined. It's done, right? This way, I don't have to worry about doing damage. Or the part that actually may get damaged is going to get cut off anyway. All right? I'm going to do this. Why? Well, one, it makes the thing less cumbersome, right? So that every time I walk by it, I'm not banging into it. But it also takes away the apical buds on this branch, right? The terminal buds, I should say. The terminal buds on these branches. And you can see that they're bigger, right? There's more packed into them because they are anticipated to take over, and continue the growth of the branch. Well, now they're gone. What does that mean? That means that other things have to fill in for them. I'm going to tip these back too, for the same reason. I'm redirecting the energy. I'm not taking all that away. I want to leave some of that because it'll help this not only fatten up, but help it set into this position. The more growth that's allowed to happen out this line, the sooner this will lignify into that position. Meaning when this gets cut, this doesn't move. Allow this to grow, that happens faster. And I can leave this on year, 2 years, whatever I need. It's not hurting anything like that. And eventually cut back to something more inside. And by tipping it back like I've done, on all these other parts, what does that do? That makes this one more likely and this one more likely to receive the energy. They're going to grow better because these have been checked. Not killed, they're still coming out, but they've been checked.
How about the
Yes?
top?
You again.
I know. The top straight one.
Yeah, this.
Yeah.
Yes,
You don't want to do any kind of wiring or
No.
anything? Okay, well,
definitely not. Because I worry about doing damage.
Right,
Inadvertent damage. Right? So
would
I'd
you cut
rather
it
let
short?
this grow and then cut it back again next year. Probably cut this shorter and maybe go back to something that comes out down here.
okay.
These are very likely to come out in addition to the other two sets because everything above it was taken away. This is a strong channel right here. A lot of energy going this way. Now it has to express itself through what remains.
Okay, so you want, it's a two-step.
Yes. Well, in bonsai, it's always at least a two-step, and usually, much more than that. Bonsai is always incremental. Always. Every now and again, you get to a nice place in your work where you can make a big stride forward and see real dramatic results. Every now and then. It's not like that typically. Typically, it's like a little bit today, a little bit tomorrow, a little bit next week, and eventually you get to where you want to be. Increments. So, looking at this, not sure about it either. It's got a certain amount of flexibility, but I cut it short, right? That's why I didn't want to cut that one short, so I'd have more leverage. Easier to bend if you're pulling from out here. When it's shortened like this, it's harder, but it's not impossible, so I'll throw a line on that too and bend it down. And again, this stop here I expect to be, or I know it's going to die, so I'm not worried about damaging it with wire. I'm going to tie off to it. Won't protect it with anything. Hopefully this will work. Might be a little bit too stubby.
Arthur, do you ever sketch any of your trees ahead of time, for planning's sake?
I don't. I have the ability to do that, Michael, and it's been advised to me to do it. Mr. Nakamura, who was my teacher in Japan, he really utilized that. When I went to Kokufu with him, he had obligations there, so he had to be there every day for 2 weeks. And I went with him, and partly to keep me occupied, but also because he recognized it would be a good, a good exercise for me in looking. He had me go out and sketch trees that were on display. And, in order to draw something, you have to really look at it. And so I learned a lot doing that. And he then said, that could be a tool for you when you're designing. And of course, it's a big favorite for people doing workshops, right? You draw them a picture of what their tree will look like in 10 years. And they, feel happy about that. And then they feel sad later on when it doesn't end up looking anything like that. And that's the thing, too, Michael, at the heart of it. When you do a sketch like that, you're imagining, right? You're projecting. This is what's going to happen in the future. This isn't here, but I think I can get it because there's a bud and whatnot. Well, it never goes the way that you anticipate. It never does. And it seems to me that there's some advantage in remaining flexible so that you're open to better possibilities that may present themselves. If I have a drawing telling me this is what I'm aiming for, this is what my tree is going to be, and then the tree throws me something unexpected, and maybe at first blush it's a negative thing, like, oh man, why'd that happen? I needed that, for my design. But then, if you're not married to that one idea, you could look at it more acceptingly, more openly, and say, maybe I can work with this. Maybe I get something a little bit better than what I thought I was going to get, just because the tree threw me a curve and I responded to it. It's that dialogue again. If I'm drawing a picture, I'm getting dictatorial. I'm saying, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm aiming for, If I don't get this, then somehow I fail. Now, I know that doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with the picture, but you can think of it roughly that way. You're committing to a certain thing. And, I've been married for 30-something years now, so I don't have a problem with commitment. But when it comes to bonsai design, when it comes to art in general, I think holding off commitment as long as you can is advantageous because things happen, right? Other possibilities pop up. Some of them may be better than what you originally thought. So this tree, right? I look at it now, and no doubt I see it much differently than you do. Maybe when you look at it, you see all kinds of things that are problematic. And certainly there are issues, right, that could be problems. Like, wow, how does this work out, right? That was a pretty dramatic cut, and then I went to something that was really close to the trunk, and it didn't move away from the trunk, and it kind of moved up almost in parallel, not exactly, but at a tight angle, and then starts arching. How does this work out in the end? And the honest answer is, I don't know. I don't know. But I'm not worried about it. I don't have to worry about that. Not now, anyway. Maybe someday. But you know what? Maybe someday this is the continuation of this branch line. Maybe this gets cut off and this becomes the continuation. I don't know. Maybe this dies back and actually hollows out a little bit. I don't know. Maybe I carve it, leave a little bit behind. Options. Options. I don't need to decide everything today. It's incremental. There's tomorrow. There's next year. There's a year after that. Wow. How do you know you're going to be alive that long? You don't. So somebody else will work on it, All it is creativity, right? You could be creative with this piece of drawing paper and a pen. If you have musical aptitude, you can be creative singing, right? You have all these different options in terms of expressing yourself, presuming you have something that you feel needs expressing and the desire to do it publicly, right? So the act of creating involves taking a chance, right? Suppose you come looking for this tree next year and it dies because I did something wrong today. I did. Don't worry about that. But it could happen that way, right? Then it's embarrassing. Like, oh yeah, you were up there talking like you knew what you were doing and you killed the plant. So you're taking a chance. You create a design that's different from the run-of-the-mill and you put it out on display and then you happen by when two critics are standing there saying, well, that's terrible, I don't think that should even be in the show. Yeah. This is just part of the game. You put yourself out there. I'm creating something here. Maybe you'll like it. I hope you will. That's always the best feeling. You put your tree out on display and you walk by and the two people who are looking at it are saying, isn't that great? Oh man, I could just picture sitting under that tree on a hot day in the shade. And then that makes you feel great. Like, oh, I've communicated with these people. I don't even know who they are, right? But I created something and they responded to it, and that makes this circuit. I communicate. That's part of this, that creative act. And challenging yourself. No, I don't have a step-by-step recipe, right? What happens next? I'm not sure. I'm going to see. I'm going to see what the tree does. And that'll help me determine what comes next. A lot of folks don't feel comfortable working that way. They want a game plan, right? Give me the plan. Give me the recipe. I can cook the thing if you give me the step-by-step account of how to do it. If that's how you like to work, great. Great. But there's the possibility for other ways where you take a chance, you try something, you have an idea, you try to express it, it works, it doesn't